Nebraska casinos are raking in tax revenue. Facilities in Lincoln and Grand Island generated more than $1 million in taxes just last month. Warhorse in Lincoln topped $800,000 in January. Grand Island's casino tallied nearly $500,000. Each operation gives 70% of its tax revenue to the Nebraska Property Tax Relief Fund, which was more than $850,000 last month. The rest of the money goes back to cities as well as the state general fund.